Good evening. My name's Robert Tulip. I'd like to welcome you to the Canberra Jung Society for this webinar on the 3rd of April, Addressing Trauma with Jungian-based Music, Psychotherapy and Artwork by Dr. Kirstin Robertson-Gillam. And I'll, rather than myself introducing Kirstin, I'll hand over directly to her to introduce herself and begin her presentation. Thank you, Kirstin.
Thank you, Robert. Good evening, everybody, and thank you all for coming, and particularly our overseas visitor who's dropped in from Dublin. Thank you, Bill. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Kirstin.
Lovely to have you with us from all those miles away. Technology is a wonderful thing, isn't it? And welcome to everybody else as well. My background, do you want to know about my background? I have
Central Highlands, well, we get really good winters. Last year it even snowed. So ridiculous.
Sorry, Kirstin, continue.
What happened there?
I think when we got a new person coming in.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So my background, I began my life as a registered nurse and midwife, and then I went into music therapy for quite a long time. And I did a lot of research into the effects of music and art on, particularly music, on people's brains and behaviours and how it works. Most of my research work, which I will be talking to you about tonight, comes from 10 years in aged care, just researching. So I've spent many more years than that, but that's, so it comes from a few older people, and that's what I have to offer you tonight. So I'm now a counsellor and music psychotherapist in private practice here in Canberra, and I do EAP.
Kirstin, you need to adjust your screen. I think as we can hardly see your face, we can see only the top half of your face. Can you adjust? Can you adjust your screen? Oh, that's better. That's better. Yeah, thank you.
Can you all see me now? Can everyone see me?
A bit further down.
Down?
Yes, I've just got you.
Can everyone
you've
see
gone
me?
the wrong way.
Can everyone see me now? Can you see?
Little bit higher, Kirstin.
Higher?
Yeah, just a fraction.
How's that?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. Hello, Patricia. I can see you now. So, tonight, I'm going to begin my lecture by addressing the nature of trauma.
I can't hear a thing.
And you can't hear a thing? Who can't hear a thing? Can everybody hear?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Is anybody not able to hear?
I've put it on unmute for everyone now. And
Part of the plant that you actually harvest and
so everyone
process
can hear you now.
sweet bit are the roots, and you do that every 2 or 3 years. You need to plant it quite large to do it. Or I'm into the gardening thing.
Right, so just continue again, Kirstin. And the James have arrived, so perhaps Jean might like to
All right.
say hello.
Hello, James, people. Okay, am I going to continue, or can everyone see me and can everybody hear me? Yes?
Yes, you're perfectly clear in sound and you're perfectly clear in video.
Okay.
If you did have a headset microphone or earbuds, that would help the sound slightly though. But I imagine you don't have them, so that's no problem.
Obviously, we don't have them. Have to do without those. I don't really like using headsets, so I'm afraid I haven't gone that way. Okay, so we'll start now then. So the first part of my lecture tonight is addressing the nature of trauma and how it has affected many aspects of humans' lives throughout the history of the human race on this planet. Following the
Oh, I can't hear you.
Who can't hear? Robert, there's somebody that can't hear.
I can hear you fine.
Somebody said, oh, I can't hear.
Yes, I heard that. It's better if that sort of question is raised in the chat room, because...
Okay. All right, so following my brief talk about trauma, we are going to do a very short
Oh, God.
of how trauma may
got mute on or something.
and I invite you to write down any questions or comments that you might have during the lecture, or vocally ask questions later. Then I will address the Jungian perspectives of the role that music and art may hold for dealing with trauma. And I'll do this by giving you 3 live examples from my clinical research work with older people via case studies using video and sound. These people are Bert, who had end-stage dementia, Jennie, who had who was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder but was re-diagnosed as psychotic depression, and Vera, a singer with dementia living in hostel care. And I just want to pause there for a moment because I think Jennie should be here. Are you here, Jennie? Jennie's not here, John.
No, she's trying to come in by audio.
Jennie's trying to come in by audio, so Jennie will be also here to answer any questions personally about her experience having had a psychotic breakdown and having recovered. So we're hoping that she will be able to at least get to talk to you from an audio perspective. So, but we are now going to go to what is trauma. Trauma happens after a perceived life-threatening event or overwhelming experience. Trauma has far-reaching effects over the lifetime of every person in existence at the moment, and it produces loss of connection to life and to others and how we live our lives. And at the moment, of course, we are all going through our own national trauma and worldwide trauma with the coronavirus, which is one of the reasons why I chose the topic of trauma. Now, the obvious causes of trauma, well, these include war, early childhood abuse, neglect, betrayal, experiencing or witnessing violence, rape, catastrophic illnesses, and chronic illnesses, serious illnesses. Now, as I go through all of these points of trauma and symptoms, I'd like you to think about where some of your life experiences may fit into what I'm talking about, and perhaps if you wanted to discuss them later, you could, or you can just take them into a little meditation later. So what are the less obvious causes of trauma? Well, there are quite a lot of daily things that can happen regularly. Car accidents, invasive medical and dental procedures. Believe it or not, there are people who do have quite a lot of trauma associated with those procedures. Falls, natural disasters, abandonment, prolonged immobilisation, exposure to heat and cold, loud noises, and birth stress for both mother and baby. What are the emotional symptoms of trauma caused by trauma? Hyperarousal, which many people have, and developing into anxiety disorders, constriction, dissociation and denial, helplessness, immobility, freezing, mood swings, the feelings of shame, which is a very big one, particularly with men, reduced ability to deal with stress and difficulty sleeping. What are the longer delayed symptoms? This progresses into panic attacks and anxiety disorders, into phobias and mental blackouts, into amnesia and forgetting where we are and what's going on, into forgetfulness and spaced out feelings, and avoidance behaviours. And this is an interesting one, attraction to dangerous situations. That can be seen a lot with teenagers who have been seriously abused in childhood, and of course addictive behaviours. And then there's psychosomatic, so-called psychosomatic illnesses, where the body takes on the trauma. Chronic fatigue, immune and endocrine system problems, headaches and migraines, neck and back problems, chronic pain and fibromyalgia. It's quite a list, isn't it, of going down this list. Further symptoms even, we keep going here. Asthma, skin disorders, digestive problems, severe premenstrual tension, stress disorder, depression and feelings of impending doom, feelings of detachment, alienation and isolation, reduced ability to make plans, and compulsion to repeat. And it's the repeating that causes so many problems. Also isolation, which we are experiencing at the moment, because we all can't relate to each other face to face at the moment, which is quite a big problem. And thanks to Peter Levine for giving us all of those nicely set out symptoms and causes of trauma. I'm sure that some of you might relate to some of those symptoms, and if you do, just remember that it doesn't necessarily mean it's trauma. You might have skin disorders or whatever from a genetic perspective, but they are known to cause, trauma is known to exacerbate these conditions. Now, having looked at all of those, let's have a look at what the DSM-5 says about major depressive disorder, because this disorder is one of the most insidious disorders we have in the world. It's the third largest cause of disability and death right around the world at a global level. It's a big problem and epitomises the depth of suffering that trauma can actually produce. And you can see these symptoms listed are quite consistent with what Peter Levine has just told us. Sadness and social isolation, memory loss, substance abuse, ruminations, worry, anger, hostility, irritability. And then comorbidity means that there are two diseases together. So the long-term anxiety and depression and dementia are now seen as comorbid because lots of people go into old age and develop dementia, and some people even earlier than old age also develop it. And of course, this is all very depressing, but we do need to really understand where we're coming from here. The long-term depression problem can go on for 30 or 40 years before a person reaches the age of about 70 or over, and some people have genetic predisposition to developing dementia. Others just continue on with depression if it's untreated. So what I would like to do now is for you to think about all, I've just gone through them quickly because I really want to focus on the main topic of our lecture tonight, which is music and art, reflecting, dealing with trauma. And I would just like you all to drop into a quiet space now. I'm going to turn on some music. I hope I'm going to turn on some music. That quiet space and see if you can think of our moments in time. Felt somewhat or very severely traumatized. Let that moment in time you to start to take a deep breath. Now all the way.
We're unable to hear you very well with the music on.
It's too loud, is it? I'll turn the music off then.
It just cuts the voice out.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think the music's working, Kirstin,
That's
so
all right.
just proceed without it.
As I said, it's all trial and error. So let's go back to that space of just relaxing and releasing tension in your body by taking a deep breath in and holding it and pushing the air all the way out until there's no more air left in your body. Letting your body breathe again and taking another deep breath in and hold and pushing the air all the way out. Giving yourselves the opportunity to just focus on some insight that may have touched your consciousness as I've read through those lists of causes and effects of trauma that people have. There's no human being on this planet that doesn't have some memory of some trauma somewhere in their background. Just let your feet and lower legs relax and release. As you breathe into them and breathing out, letting your breath take you into a nice, quiet, resting place. Breathing into your pelvic area and your abdominal area, right up into your chest, across the top of your shoulders and down both arms and hands. Breathing in and relaxing as you breathe out. And letting your body sink further and deeper into the chair you're sitting in. Letting your back rest against the back of the chair. As you breathe in through the lower spine, all the way out through the thoracic spine and neck, and up to the back of the head and across the top of the head, and down into your face, and then all your facial muscles. Just relax now. Let all the tension drain out of your body. Just quietly relax. And this time I will not speak. I'm going to put on the music so you can just sit there quietly for a few minutes. So now that the music is finished, and we have sat in contemplation about trauma, just knowing what has happened to us individually.
This is awful. I don't know if I can cope with this.
We're going to now go into...
Kirstin, can I suggest you move on to another slide?
I'm about to. We're going to go on to...
I think that slide was mucking up with the sound quality.
Oh, okay. You're not hearing it? John, I can't move this slide. Oh, here we are. Now I've gone all the way. So the role of music and art to addressing symptoms of trauma. Schneck and Bergen said, music is what...
Kirstin, I'll just mention to you that a number of people are finding it quite hard to hear what you're saying. So it would be good if you can sit as close as possible to the microphone and speak quite strongly. Thank you.
Is that better? Is that better now? Can if people hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So music and art are like defaults in our system that can buffer the serious effects of trauma and act like transitional objects and archetypal symbols that enable us to softly visit the trauma bit by bit until we build resilience to face it up front and finally absorb the damage it has done in our lives. Through the use of symbols such as music and art, we can learn to build self-awareness and resilience. Symbols, what are they? They have the capacity to point beyond themselves, and they can take us into the deepest layers of consciousness. When our music ego is capable of listening, we can become open to a tremendous capacity for a rich embodied experience, according to Krocker. For this to happen, we need to let go of our ego defense mechanisms and be open to the unfolding journey that lies in the message of the music, pointing to our path of individuation that we all must take. Krocker says, we need to listen to the music of life. It's everywhere, and it points the way into the depths of our unconscious. revealing the dynamics of our own inner world where the treasures lie. And as a follow-on from this statement, William Law suggested, the poet, that each of us need to begin to search and dig in thine own field for this pearl of eternity that lies in it. It cannot cost thee too much, nor canst thou buy it too dear, for it is all. Everything else becomes like a mere nothing, a bubble upon the water. Is everyone hearing me okay? Just checking in. Is everyone hearing me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Good, good, good. I just need to know. A symbol gives access to deeper layers where there has previously been no contact point, where everything is floating and disconnected within the psyche. This image is reminiscent of the ancient Egyptian myth of Isis and Osiris, where Isis had to collect and reconnect Osiris's body parts after he was murdered by his brother Seth, who threw his body parts all over the world and then inherited the throne. It wasn't until all parts had been retrieved that Osiris could become whole again, allowing Isis to posthumously conceive their son Horus, who could then ascend to the throne and displace Seth. And that this story has its relevance in the way all the body parts had to be collected in order for Osiris to become whole again. In the light of this image, in Jennie's case, she bravely dived into her own field to dig and search for her pearl that was so precious because she had lost everything when she had her breakdown. Her music symbol pointed her to her own individuation process, which was the treasure that lay within, deeply buried under layers of early childhood trauma. So much had already been lost in Jennie's life since her breakdown 8 years beforehand. However, more was to be lost before she found herself again in a new way. Once she found her pearl of eternity, she individuated and grew into the person she is today. Jennie's music symbols were her vocal utterances in improvisation. Her child self became alive and also expressed itself in the bold lines and colours of her mandalas. Each mandala showed her child self growing stronger every day until she finally found the courage to move herself out of aged care and back into her world in a new way. And you will see the images of Jennie actually growing in the case study. In Bert's case, he was trying to reach his soul self so he could find his way back to his spiritual home. He needed to fly away from this earthly toil, but first he had to bring together so many elements within himself that lay deep inside his psyche, within the body of a tired old man who had ceased to function in every way. His musical symbol was whistling. It became the vehicle by which to plumb the depths of his unconscious and grew the awareness that allowed his soul to take flight. The deeper, untapped and precious resources that lay at the bottom of Jennie's and Bert's unconscious had to be discovered like gold or diamonds by utilising music resources that were known in the world, which were closer to the surface of ego consciousness than the unconscious. Music and art are symbols that give joy and beauty. They are safe vehicles on which the psyche can travel to discover the treasures that lie within. In Jennie's case, it was coming back into the world and growing into the person she is today. In Bert's case, it was leaving this world and flying away on the rainbows of colours to the spirit world. Vera's music symbol was embodied in the melody and words of Gershwin's song Summertime, which enabled her to peek out of her dementia cloud and look around at the world she was currently inhabiting with new perceptions. Through the power of the song's words, the melody, and myself as her therapist who understood the song's message, Vera was enabled to relate to her world in a more conscious way, thereby connecting with her family and with those around her. Krocker said, what we cannot yet name or articulate in our experience, what we might find a way to feel and express within the music. And this is where words fail music and art are there, right there expressing what we really need to say. All these three cases have utilised music in this way. And when we become musical thinkers, our world explodes with sound, and we are the creators of it. The music holds our souls, our feelings and emotions. It reorganises our thoughts and perceptions and allows the expression of deep unconscious material to safely come to the surface. This material might have been firmly pushed down into the depths of unconsciousness for very good reasons, such as toxic relationships or childhood, sexual abuse or other trauma, or even total overwhelm at life. In the world of musical thinking, words become notes in the air as the wind picks up and catches the sail of the consulting room, and we all move forward with a new sensitized feeling. That was Krocker's quote. So for Jennie, Bert and Vera, the thin experience of surface facts that kept them walking through life like robots and allowed them to float, nursing their hurts, fears and pains over many years, were woken up with the music symbols.
I can't. It's so hard to understand what's being said.
Well, let me keep going, and we'll talk about it later in a minute.
Maybe we can get a written copy of this.
Yes, you can get a written copy.
That would be wonderful, because it's so, I've got good hearing, but I can't make out the words.
Is it because you can't hear?
I've got excellent hearing. It's all...
Kirstin, I think unfortunately the quality of your computer is quite low, and it's quite noisy. So there's a lot of background noise coming from your computer, unless there's some other machine making noise behind you, and then also your voice is breaking up as you're speaking with the internet line.
Oh, is it? Oh, did you know that, John?
No.
So it's just been a bit difficult to understand.
I'll turn my computer off.
Well, Donald's going to turn his computer off. It might be his computer that's whirring in the background.
So let's just continue now.
For Jennie, Bert and Vera, the thin experience of surface facts that kept them walking through life like robots and allowed them to float, nursing their hurts, fears and pains, over many years were woken up with the music symbols. What's this mean? John, come here, will you? You know what this means?
The host has asked you to start your video.
Yeah. So now we can see you again. You've been on just picture, so let's just
you see me now?
See if that's okay. And also put your camera up a little bit higher so that we can see.
That's too
No,
high.
that's too high. Oh, sorry, down a bit lower, I mean. Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. So I don't know where I'm at now. The push from the psyche demanded the music, and in order to achieve healing, all these elements that had never had any representation before were softly picked up by the notes and carried to the surface for healing. Their music became their waking dream that was loaded with all their symbols for healing. They were able to finally listen to their unconscious. They had no choice. The psyche demanded it. All disparate parts of themselves were brought together for a richly embodied experience of becoming as whole as they could be. And before we listen to their music, let us look at what neuroscience research says about music and the brain and the body. Music activates widespread bilateral networks in the brain that govern attention, semantic processing, memory, motor functions, emotional processing, emotional regulation, and cognitive functioning. So that is a remarkable study that was done by Sakano in 2008, and it has held steady ever since. It was found in 2010 that the hippocampus, which plays a pivotal role in the generation of positive emotions, was stimulated by music, but that depressed individuals demonstrated reduced volume in hippocampal formation. So the hippocampus in the brain is where we have all the neurotransmitters, particularly dopamine, which helps us to remain positive and form positive feelings about life. Music therapy depression studies are quite in abundance these days, and I've just picked a few to talk about. Active participation in music therapy assists emotional regulation, showing alpha and theta changes in frontotemporal regions from MDD and general anxiety disorder. And these are Finnish researchers, and they did that study in 2011, where these participants came, had their brains measured with EEG, and took part in music therapy, improvisation and talking and singing, and then had their brains tested again to see what changes occurred. And again in 2013, they more or less repeated, I think it's 2013, they repeated the same study in 2013, but this time they used improvisation. The art therapy depression studies are not as in abundance as the music therapy ones are, but this one was interesting, I felt. It was by Time and others in 2007, which showed that short-term psychodynamic-based art therapy showed fewer depressive and stress-related symptoms in depressed women, with a very positive trend towards reducing depression. Now we'll get to my own study, which is depression and brain asymmetry. So when people started testing using EEG coherence therapies, we found that when a person becomes depressed or very anxious, brain asymmetry happens. So the right and the left brain become unbalanced. An underactive right hemisphere can increase depressive symptoms. And depressed individuals lack the ability to minimize the duration of their negative thoughts, which actually goes back to the whole idea of the hippocampus not being able to generate positive thoughts because of depression. In my study, I had 21 people in a choir in the Blue Mountains, and we tested them before the choir, and you could see the group before the choir and 8 weeks later after the choir. All those blobs of red and pink and orange shouldn't be there. That shows imbalance between the hemispheres. And 8 weeks later, after they had the choir program, most of that was all gone. So now we're up to what we're going to look at, which is whistling with Bert, vocalization, improvisations with Jennie, and summertime with Vera. This is Bert. Bert had spent his life as a taxi driver. And when I was asked to come and see Bert, the reason was that he was whistling constantly day and night, hardly sleeping at all. He was very sick at this stage. And the nursing staff asked me, would I come over and stop him from whistling? Well, I took a very different approach because I felt that whistling was a musical behaviour. I was thinking in a musical way. And for Bert, it turned out, he was unconsciously preparing for his death, but had begun to doubt whether he still existed. So how could he die if he didn't exist? This was his dilemma. His whistling was so he could find out if somebody could listen to him and respond in the way he needed to. Now, because this whistling is a musical symbol, it's a musical phrase that needs a musical response. His music was like a waking dream loaded with the symbolic. This is so relevant for a person with end-stage dementia. I answered back his singing, his whistling by singing and repeating his musical phrase, and he stopped and listened. So I sang it again and told him he could whistle and sing. He smiled and extemporized a longer improvised version of his musical phrase, reaching out to see if he still existed. And when we finished that, he turned to me and said, "That's very good. You've done very well," to myself. So let's listen to Bert singing. There's no... It's not working.
I think it's unlike, we probably won't. Oh, there we are.
No, there's a lot of background noise in this nursing home. So that was at the beginning of our journey together for 6 months. And what Bert really was looking for was a map to cross to the other side. And he told me he didn't know how to get there. One day we sat under the trees and he watched the birds flying around, singing their songs, filling the air with musical memes. I told him he could fly away like those birds, and subsequently produced a song called The Bird in the Sky to help reduce his anxiety and help him to feel safe. And this song became the symbol of his final life journey. It carried him through the next few months to his final note on this earth. And when he came into the room this day, I can't change it. When he came into the room this day, he urgently grabbed my hand. No, yes, I don't want to play it. That's not the one. I want the next one. Change it.
Like I've seen it.
Sorry, everyone. There we are. This, as I said at the beginning of this lecture, it's a trial and error thing, isn't it? We learn by this. So in this one, this is the last day of I worked with Bert, and he died a few days later. And he grabbed my hand and he said, "Up, up." And at first I thought he meant he wanted me to sing higher, but then I realised he wanted me to sing the Bird in the Sky song, which I did. Now he knew he was real. Now he knew he existed. And because of this, he knew he could safely fly away. It was time to go. Let's listen to this last interaction. I used this example, and I'm sure that some of us might feel sad, but it's not really sad. It's very deep and meaningful. And this was a triumph of her, a triumph of his total existence. And I didn't feel sad at all. He became such a wonderful person to work with. Now we're going to go to Vera, because this is another different type of, here we go again. There. This is Vera. It turned out that Vera was a singer. Nobody knew this in the nursing home. She had lived there with dementia for a year or two, and she hadn't sung. And I came along and started a choir, a research choir. And one of the things that I did every time we had the choir was to go around and ask each person to sing me their song. And when I came to Vera, she burst out into voice with Gershwin's Summertime, which has surprised everybody. And this song told me so much about Vera. She leaned forward to pat my cheek, singing the words, "Hush, little baby, don't you cry." A whole world of meaning about how she'd been a mother and a singer, a daughter, a sister, an aunt. She revealed her personhood to me through this song. And this song became her stable base for her to start to move out of her dementia fog and start to take part in the world around her. She began to extend her limited vocabulary and communicate with people. She came to meals. She showed an interest in her clothes again and her daughter, and she laughed and cried just like everybody else did. So this is Vera singing Summertime. All of these are pivotal moments that I'm giving you, and they're coming because I have them on video. I can share them, and they're coming to you to say you all have pivotal moments. We all do, and we all can have them through music and through the work of art as well. So now we're going to go on to look at Jennie. This is Jennie, and you can see from her photos her progression from a young child to a young adult to the person she is today, a mature, beautiful woman. I met Jennie when she was only 54, and she'd had a very bad breakdown, very psychotic, serious breakdown. And she was bewildered and upset because here she was living in a nursing home in a hostel room with 80 and 90-year-olds, and she believed that her life was over. I asked her to tell me her life story on our first encounter when she was sitting in a group of other people doing some music improvisation, and she didn't seem to fit in, so I took her out of there and we talked. And as she told me her story, I began to through my musical thinking, I began to think of music to represent what she was saying to me. And so I pulled out my auto harp and I improvised a response to her. And then I asked her to draw a mandala for her response back to me. so that we could bypass words. When she drew her mandala, it had an empty center, which she said bothered her. And during her narrative, she said that she couldn't cry anymore and had not done so for years. So I invited her to express this feeling through a mutual drum conversation we had together. Halfway through our drumming, Jennie cried out, "I'm going to cry," and gestured to stop. But I kept her going, saying to her, "Cry, cry," and we fetched her some tissues. And Jennie wept. And then she went back to her hostel room in a state of bewilderment, saying that she couldn't imagine ever doing that again, crying like that. And I said to her, "Never say never." And then she asked if she could have music there, those sort of sessions with me, and she did, twice a week for 3 years. And at the end of that time, she was able to get herself out of there herself. 18 months into her therapy journey with me, Jennie began to feel stronger in her instrumental improvisations, her choir work, she was in the choir, her talking therapy regularly, the journaling and her mindfulness meditations. But she still hadn't cried, so I introduced vocal improvisation therapy. The following audio example, she entitled "I Will Be Heard," shows how Jennie became more and more assertive in her vocal improvisations as her voice began to grow louder and stronger above my voice. So we'll listen to this now. Oh. So you will hear my voice moving around her voice and moving down when she went up. But this was the first time in 18 months that Jennie had moved forward with her voice and wanted to be the prominent voice. She had always said to me before that, "I don't have a voice, I can't sing." And then she went and did this, and she was very assertive about it. And you can see her mandala is a very interesting lot of lines and curves. And she was very, very definite that this was what she wanted to say, "I will be heard." So then if we fast forward again to 6 months later, and Jennie was invited by myself to do an improvisation because she still hadn't cried, and I was getting concerned that she wasn't going to cry. It was very important for her to be able to break through that barrier of not being able to cry. So this time I set up the room with a variety of percussion instruments like handbells and xylophones and shakers and tambourines and drums. And I encouraged her to sing out loud her thoughts and feelings as they were coming to her while she was making the music. And I accompanied her on the piano using 4th and 5th chords in order to let her fill in the musical spaces. Her vocalizations and statements became mixed with tears as the trauma tumbled out of her, climaxing in loud crashes on the drum. Jennie cried. The mandala showed the frantic scribbling of a very young child. Oh, still not to, no. Okay, sorry, we're just having trouble moving from one slide to the next. So you'll see here in this mandala of Jennie's that there are two mandalas that are similar to each other. The first one she drew are following a nightmare dream she had in January of that year. And this one is in June of that same year. And when she drew the one in June, I said to her, you need to go back and look through your mandalas because you've done this before. She called the first one Journey Through Hell. She called the second one No Voice, because you will hear in a recording what she was thinking and feeling as she was crying and shouting into the music. It's a very loud, crashing, quite violent recording, so I'm just warning you, it's not pleasant like the last one. So here we go. No. I'm sorry, we can't play that. It doesn't seem to have come through. It should have been there, but it's not. So what Jennie was singing about was, I have no mouth, I have no voice, my partner is in charge of me, I can't do anything, I'm no good. And she cried and wept into the drums while I answered her back with my vocalisations on the piano. At the end of the vocalisation, she sat in a corner holding an image of her 4-year-old self behind a tree hiding. And it was this improvisation and the music-induced image that was her pivotal moment that brought about her eventual rehabilitation and her return to the community at large. Over the next 2 years, Jennie grew stronger and stronger until she was finally unable to organise herself all on her own to leave the aged care facility and return to a new life, living in the community where she lives today. She studied mental health advocacy at TAFE and still does her work to this very day. I hope that you can see by these 3 case studies how each person had a pivotal moment in the music that was induced by the music, through musical thinking of the therapist as well, and how I created this environment for them and thought musically, which enabled them to reach into the deepest depths of their unconscious and to find some healing and some safeness. But Birgit was leaving this world and going home to heaven. But Vera was coming out of her dementia cloud and going out into the community again, in her dementia community, and learning to relate to people again and feel herself again. With Jennie, well, Jennie was an enormously special case. What she did was that she went to her psychiatrist and said, I'm getting better and I don't want to be on these medications anymore. And he said, well, we diagnosed you with schizoaffective disorder, but we can't diagnose you with that anymore because people don't get better from that. So she was given the label of psychotic depression instead. That was in 2006. Now, here we are, 2020, and Jennie's still out there living her life out in country disco. She's still part of she lectures to medical students at Sydney University about her experiences, and she is a full-blown woman of her own in her own right. So she's someone to be very proud of. And I'm hoping that by all of these cases, and the comments that I brought out from John Krocker and my own ramblings, and as some people have said, they couldn't really understand them. The world of music and art, using the symbols for healing trauma, can be very effective for all of us in everyday life. I'm sure that many of you put on a piece of music that you know will meet your emotional needs. When we have a serious problem, we can always turn to music. And there's always a music therapist out there somewhere who can work with you and help you to deal with your own deep and unconscious problems in this way. Trauma is something that happens to all of us, and we all need to approach it in our own way. But music and art are wonderful ways of being able to access the deepest levels of our unconscious mind. And I hope that you will have some questions and answers for me soon. We'll have a few minutes break while you might maybe get a drink or something, and then Robert will come back and talk to you before you ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry that it's all been so up and down.
No, you did very well as a first attempt in this very strange environment.
Well, it is a strange environment. I don't really know how I'm coming across to any of you at the moment, and I know that there are people out there who have found it difficult, and I apologise to you for that. But I'm the guinea pig that started the whole thing off, because we were told the other night by Scott Morrison that this isolation could go on for another 6 months. And if that's the case, then we might be utilising Zoom for other events as well, hopefully the Friday night ones while we can't meet in person. So we're hoping that we will be able to iron out all the little problems that we found tonight and do a better job next month with Robert.
Kirstin, you did a great job. Thank you very much. And there are going to be technical hiccups on the first night, but you're terrific. Thank you.
Oh, well, I hope that you understood what I was saying. I'm sorry if it came across, it's a bit jumpy and up and down, but there are many points of real depth and thinking to do there, to talk about from the perspective of Jungian psychology, which I'm sure, Dorothy, you found there. Is that correct?
Well, I really enjoyed the lecture, but I did have some trouble hearing. So,
I'm very sorry about that. Yes.
And that's, I think, teething problems which you'll probably iron out over time.
We will. And we'll probably get ourselves a headset. I don't like wearing headsets, and I've tried to avoid those things, but it looks like I will have to get a headset.
It does make a difference.
Yes, I'm sure it does. Yes, yes. It does make a difference for those poor unfortunates who've been trying to listen to me and make out what I'm saying.
But it was a very good lecture. I really enjoyed the case studies.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Dorothy, have you got any questions you want to ask me at all? Or comments?
I thought we'll do that later at the comment and question session.
Okay, so we'll wait for Robert to come back online.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
9 now. So would you like to now come online, Robert, and talk to people?
Well, we said we'd give people 5 minutes, so let's wait another 2 minutes. I'm just going to check, Kirstin, with your sound. There was a question as to whether it's due to it shows that it's your computer that has been making quite a loud noise, and so that's been just a technical difficulty that we've had. So when I put you on mute, we can't hear that noise anymore, and when I take you off mute, then the noise of your computer will come back.
Okay, so it must be my computer. John turned his off.
Well, Robert James thought that perhaps it was a network effect. Robert, did you have a comment?
Yes. Well, we can do some experiments with this without 25 people waiting on us. So some of the things are under our control and some are not. I understand that the Zoom client user load has increased from 40 million to 200 million in the last week. So we're competing with maybe 200 million other clients and using the conferencing network. So we can't do much about that. We can try different microphones and headsets and so forth. So let's do that anyway before we all come back together again.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think testing the technical setup is important for these sorts of presentations.
I think it was a fairly ambitious start with 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 Zoom and the hardware and the PowerPoint and the videos and the speech and everything. So I think we did very well as a start. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it wasn't just a straightforward lecture, was it? It was utilising all those other resources as well.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I mean, that's the nature of music, isn't it? You can't just talk about music. You have to hear it in order to get the effect of it. So that's one of the problems. I mean, with art, you can show the picture, but with music, you have to play the sound.
Yeah.
So Kirstin, just preparing for the, let me see. I'll put my video back on. Preparing for the question and answer session, Jean suggested that that I should just quickly introduce my talk for next month on the 1st of May.
Yes, certainly.
And I'll be talking about archetypal dimensions within the work of Leonardo da Vinci, and so specifically looking at how Carl Jung's theory of archetypes of the collective unconscious suggests images and symbols within Christian tradition, which are then used by Leonardo da Vinci in his painting of the Last Supper. So I hope people will be able to join that. We'll try again with a Zoom talk, and I look forward to speaking with you next month. Thank you.
That sounds wonderful, Robert, and I hope everybody will come to it. I'll certainly be there. I'm looking forward to that. I love Leonardo da Vinci's. I think that art has amazing depths in it.
That'll be great.
So that's all from me. I mean, perhaps we can move on to questions.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I will certainly look forward to it. When I asked you to consider whether you might come back in this medium in a month, I thought you'd want to sort of have a little bit of a look at how he went tonight, but it seems as though you're enough encouraged to try it again.
I do think, Robert, that the background noise that we were hearing was from Kirstin's screen, because when I put Kirstin on mute, it stopped. And when I took her off mute, it started again. So I don't think it's true that it's a network issue, but perhaps we can move on to questions about Kirstin's talk.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you.
Well, it would be probably preferable for me if we have enough time for people to ask questions verbally, because I don't seem to have, I don't know why, but I don't seem to have access to the box where everyone's written their questions in.
Well, one question I have, Kirstin, do you still need to have your PowerPoint up, or can we put it?
No, I don't know. John, can you put my...
I never saw the PowerPoint, by the way.
Well, I had to use PowerPoints in order to get the recordings done, and I thought it was easier for you to see. I've actually taken part in Zoom meetings where there's been PowerPoints.
So have other people been able to see the PowerPoint?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yes.
Okay, so just Shauna. All right, well, now we're not sharing anymore, and I'll just point out to you that there's a spot up on the top right-hand corner where you've got the options of either you've got 9 dots or you've got a or it says speaker view, and if and people are welcome to people who wish to speak can maybe say so in the chat room if they want to have their camera on.
Have have you put our videos off? Because I can't put my video on.
Yeah, I have, yes, and I'll put it on again now.
That's okay. I'll sit up then.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll ask a question flowing from the Jennie case study. Thanks, Kirstin, and I salute your courage in talking about this and playing the singing and all that. A lot of us would not be very eager to do that straight up. I was interested in your point where there was a change in her condition, become very favourably so, and she was sort of relabelled. Oh, the diagnosis must be wrong because originally it would not allow her to move out of that. I wonder to what extent we're stuck with labelling in this sort of field, where that becomes a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy if we're not careful once we slap a label onto somebody.
Yes, you've made a good point there, Robert. Can everyone hear me?
Yes. Yes.
I have found many people who want to hide behind labels like that, and that's not everyone, of course, but a label can be a comforting thing to know, oh, that's what's wrong with me, thank goodness for that, and that is a good thing, and so to have a diagnosis is a good thing, but the diagnosis, in my way of thinking, is a moving feast. Put it that way. Day by day, daily, we change. And, you know, we might have something wrong with this. Biologically, yes, if we have heart disease or bowel problems or whatever, they have to be treated properly, and they are long-standing in many ways diagnoses. But when it comes to mental health, and I'm not sure, Shauna, whether you probably agree with me here, but when it comes to mental health, for me, I'm open to that, because I've seen so many people being told, oh, you've got this and oh, you've got that, in my own work. And I'm not saying generally, just what I've encountered myself. And so I do wonder about how much we need to have labels. Like we label ourselves with our names, we label our genders, we label all sorts of things. That's the nature of being human, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a hard one to answer, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, it can either, like you said, be a good thing. We don't know what these illnesses are. We have a biomedical model. We have other people saying it's trauma. You know, we haven't found it. We haven't found what the brain is doing. There are no biological markers for them, so we don't actually know what they are.
And so, I mean, we're getting somewhere, aren't we, sort of with those EEG readings, but they're very inaccurate, really. They're only just touching the tip of the iceberg. They're really only testing the scalp.
But like what Robert was saying, you know, if someone is labelled at a young age and put on this sort of course, which is like there's no hope for you, or it seems there can be much more recovery than there has been. So that the idea that you're not going to recover and there is no hope for you in life is a really devastating thing for a young person.
Very devastating.
You know, where it doesn't really need to be like that, I don't think.
No, I don't think so. We always have to have hope. No matter how hopeless the situation is, we always need hope. And some people, there are only a very few, but some people have managed to spontaneously recover from all sorts of life-threatening illnesses that we didn't know they could recover from. And because there have been some of those people, then we know it's possible to somehow transcend a lot of our suffering, but we don't really know quite how to get there, because we have a long way to go yet in our development, I think, as human beings. Anybody else want to make a comment?
I'm wondering, because all three cases you talked about were very long term.
They were, yes.
So I'm just wondering if you could maybe talk a bit about the difference between working long term with people, which seem very effective, or how much difference can you make when you're doing a short-term piece of work?
Are you referring to acute mental disorders, or are you referring to
whatever in your experience? You would have done both.
Yes.
Yeah.
So somebody who's had a serious shock and from an accident, or has been given a particularly difficult diagnosis that is going to change their lives forever, the initial reaction is shock, and often words don't do it in those ways. And this is where the symbolism of music can come in, because it's sound and it's immediate and it gives feedback, and you can improvise with music, and you can show that improvise with symbols. So as music therapists, we use lots of symbolism in music, and we take the elements of music, and those of you who are music therapists here can pipe up if you like. We look at the use of intervals of sound and the use of octaves and chords and structural changes and the start stop and reaching a climax in the music and all those kinds of things for emotional regulation and for satisfying a person. I mean, Joel Krocker talks about music as being a digestible thing, something that you can digest. And I myself, I don't know about anyone else, but I have certain pieces of music that I can actually listen to and feel like I've had a very good meal, because it's so enjoyable for me that I've digested that music into my being. And I think that music is beyond just entertainment. It has a very enormous depth to it that can meet people at the deepest depth where nothing else can. And so I think because it's immediate, because it's sound, you never play a piece of music ever the same the second time around. It might sound the same, but it's never the same. And I think that is a very important aspect of how we can use music therapeutically. So yes, acute illnesses, it's like sitting with a person and listening to them and singing back their responses, like I did with Jennie when she first told me her narrative. She had been chronically ill for 8 years. Granted, if I had met her when she had just had her breakdown, maybe we could have started something that may have taken less time for her than the 8 years and subsequent years after that of recovery. But it didn't, and it would be nice to have a music therapist in an acute psychiatric unit where people are brought in an acute state. And it's kind of like shamanism, shaman work. Being like a shaman, sitting beside a person, entering into their experience, sharing it through sound, singing it back to them, having them sing to you, having them beat on a drum. Or I had one girl once who actually smashed the skin of a drum because she was so angry with her mother, and I got her to run around the block 4 times to come back, and she still smashed the skin of the drum. But she catharted through that experience. And so it was the drumming in that immediate moment, and with me actually accompanying her on the piano. And the more she shouted, the more I shouted back. So I was matching everything that she was doing. And out of that experience, she was able to come to terms with her relationship with her mother. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And I'm thinking, I mean, it isn't music, but I remember I had working with someone, and the way she expressed her cathartic experience was she literally shredded 3 telephone books.
Shredded 3 telephone books. Doesn't surprise me. Oh, wow. It's amazing, isn't it?
And they're big telephone books.
Yeah. They're really thick, aren't they? Like,
yeah. She shredded 3 of them.
Amazing.
It was amazing.
And you sat and watched her do that?
Yeah, I was with her.
And
I had to have a number of pins to gather up all the pieces, but it was a very cathartic experience for her.
So you're an accomplice to this distraction.
That's
I
right.
definitely was an accomplice to
Yeah.
the destruction of telephone books.
Yeah. And that was the unconscious working in such a powerful way, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was thinking of the lady with the drum. Yeah, I can identify with that.
Yeah. And very often in a music therapy session, I found that a person will suddenly get an insight. But I do recall a moment in time when I was working in a palliative care unit where I did a collage workshop with the staff for self-care, and the nursing unit manager of that particular floor did her collage, looked at it and said, "I'm in the wrong job, I'm leaving," and promptly put in her resignation. She had an insight that what she had created in that collage, something that told her that no wonder I'm not happy in my life because I'm in the wrong job. And she had the courage to actually leave. I mean, without even knowing where she was going to. She just said, I can't be here anymore. I'm going. Mind you, management wasn't very happy with me. They lost their nursing unit manager. But that is a powerful thing for creative expressive arts to be able to do that. Wendy, have you got any stories about your work in music?
I was just thinking of, can you hear me?
Yes, okay.
I was just thinking of the art and music and the combination of creative arts and how often they're not put together, that you've got this separation of a creative art through art and separate categories, art therapy, music therapy being two separate things. But I think what you're really working with is the creative arts combined as therapy.
I think that I remember in the lecture I talked about musical thinking.
Yeah.
Maybe I should extend that to creative thinking, because for me, I see the experience of music and what's being expressed in music to be very synonymous with the same experience being expressed in art. So that we can take a problem to the music and let the music sort it out for us. Then we can express it in a visual way in the art. I've always seen that. I've always done my own art. So I guess I'm coming from a very holistic perspective there, where I cannot categorize. I can't say that's art therapy, this is music therapy, that's expressive art. To me, it's all just a human response.
It sounds quite simplified, but something like psychotic episode is this huge amount of psychic energy that's just been repressed, you know, for whatever reason. It's not been allowed to be expressed, and you know, it just builds up to the point, you know. So that process of art, of kind of allowing psychic energy to come out, is, you know,
and Shauna, you made a point that with that explosive energy that has been suppressed for so long, you can't just pull the lid on it and let it all come out, because that can be extremely damaging.
Yeah, it's dangerous. Yeah,
very, very
That's
dangerous.
why if you psychotic, or you you know, you don't go on a Vipassana meditation retreat. You know, you don't do something like you can meditate gently, but you don't do something like 10 days intense meditation, because you just open that lid so quickly. You know, there's so many things you've got to be careful with, because that barrier is, yeah, quite.
So, very much so, and that's a really good point you've brought out, and you know it very much yourself from your own experience. And I think that we have to be very, very careful, particularly with with music because it's so immediate. And so all music therapists are taught to be very careful with people's psychic processes when they're using music. I mean, even when you're working in palliative care at the end of life, you know, I spent 5 years working in the hospice, and our youngest patient who died there was 16, and the oldest one was over 100. So it went right pretty well through the lifespan, really, except for early childhood. And you know, it's so. One lady once asked me. She asked me for weeks would I send Camus Angelicus to her, and the therapist in me, as I got to know her, told me that this was not the song for her. I shouldn't sing this song. And she just kept asking and asking. And in the end, I said, all right, I'll sing you the song, but you must stop me if you need to. And she did, because it brought up a memory of abuse in early childhood. And I just knew it was going to happen. But before she died, she needed to face that. And because she'd asked me for so long, gradually we were able to work with the materials we had that came up from her psyche and be gentle with it and let her gradually come to terms with what had happened to her, that this song had brought a memory of. And so as music therapists, we have to be very, very careful, especially working with people at the end of their lives.
I was gonna say as well, like, you don't need to address all trauma front on. You know, like, so like, you know, trauma, you just kind of manage it by living a secure life or a calm life. You don't have to. I'm echoing because Jeff's behind me, sorry. But yeah, you don't have to go and, you know, grab that trauma and drag it out.
No, you don't. Absolutely agree with you. That's a really good point you've made. And this is where I believe that music and art can be like transitional objects where people can drop into the music and enjoy it if it's not threatening to them, and just enjoy being in the music, enjoy singing a few songs, enjoy playing a few tambourines and a bit of drumming, and have a bit of fun with it. Enjoy pasting and gluing pictures on and making a collage or drawing with it. Those sorts of things can be like transitional objects that can gradually help a person to feel safer and safer so that they can reach that point where a cathartic moment like with Jennie that you didn't hear can come about. But that took 20, nearly 2 years for that to come to the fruition. It didn't just happen overnight. And she had to have lots and lots of support in order to be able to work through that cathartic response, you know.
I've got a question, Kirstin. And maybe you've already sort of covered it, but the sound quality wasn't the best.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, is it just a matter of listening to a piece of music, or is there some sort of process that you can get the healing benefits out of it?
It's a process. Everything is a process, and music is a process in itself.
But for a lame person, would I start off, for instance, just putting on a piece of music, and then the process just takes its own direction, its own course? Is that how it works?
If you're talking about using music as a therapeutic tool for yourself, I would suggest that you don't do it that way, because everybody sits down and listens to music. Everybody goes to concerts. Everyone hears pieces of music.
Well, actually, not everyone does, and I'm one of those people who doesn't. So that's why I ask in particular.
I would actually, be very careful what you listen to on your own. If you have feelings that maybe the music might bring up an issue. If you don't, just enjoy the music for what it is. Put on music, experiment with it. If things come up for you, then go and look for a therapist and work through it with them. Don't do it all on your own. It's not safe to do that. But I'm talking about real mental health issues here. I'm not talking about just ordinary people with emotional problems. I mean, I myself have listened to songs and bawled my eyes out because it's touched a chord inside me that has taken me back to a moment in time that I had possibly forgotten about, or that I was really feeling under the surface and wasn't willing to consciously look at. So, you know, suddenly, well, for instance, after my mother died, one of her favourite hymns was Abide With Me, and John and I were going somewhere. Where were we going for? Something. We were driving to a concert, and somehow or another, did you put a CD on? And it was Abide With Me came on. Well, I just lost it at that moment in time, because it took me straight back to, I miss my mother. My mother just died, and I miss her, and this song takes me to my mother.
What about it? You were talking about mental health issues, not chronic fatigue syndrome. You certainly mentioned that in your symptoms list, but post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes, well, that's a huge, big elephant in the room, isn't it? There's more and more of that is coming along, and post-traumatic stress disorder is a difficult thing, a very difficult thing. It takes a while to work through. It takes a while to manifest. It takes a while to get a diagnosis of it. And then if you hang on to the diagnosis, it takes a while to heal. So in post-traumatic stress disorder, it's really just a combination of a lot of those symptoms that I talked about in the trauma, and how those symptoms can manifest in one whole umbrella of syndrome called post-traumatic stress disorder, which relates back to an original trauma somewhere in your life. That if you have post-traumatic stress disorder, you do need to go and talk to a qualified therapist and work through that issue if it comes up. So post-traumatic stress disorder is one disorder that I really urge people, anyone, to go and visit a therapist for working through your trauma issues, and use music by all means, but make sure you're with somebody who's properly qualified to help you deal with it, because you could decompensate on your own, and that's not a good look.
Sorry,
Kirstin, we've reached 9:30.
We're having so much fun talking.
Thank
you for that, Robert.
I think I'm happy for people to continue for a bit longer, but we were expecting to finish fairly soon.
Okay. Well, if people want to drop out, if people want to stay, what do you want to do? It's up to you.
Adele was about to ask.
Yes, what do you mean, Kirstin, by decompensate? I think that's what you said.
Well, we like to have holistic elements in our psyche to bring together, as I said in the lecture about the Isis and Osiris myth, and bringing parts of ourselves together in order to become whole. And in post-traumatic stress disorder, we're not whole because we've been traumatized, and we've cut off parts of ourselves so that we can manage to walk this narrow path of what we can manage to deal with. And post-traumatic stress disorder can manifest itself in very different ways in many, many situations. You can be driving along the road and suddenly a piece of music comes on, or somebody says something to you and you're instantly into panic, for instance. That's post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's a complicated disorder, and it's quite complex in many, many ways, the way it manifests in life. And in order to be able to deal with it, if you have it, if anybody has it, is to be able to actually understand it and understand yourself. And I think you can do that through having therapy. And not necessarily music therapy either, but any kind of therapy really, to talk it through. And you know, if particularly an issue just comes up in your consciousness spontaneously, and you start to cry and you start to get breathless and panicky, then that's post-traumatic stress disorder manifesting in that moment. That's the moment you need to deal with it with a therapist. Does that make it clear?
I know what you're saying, but if that isn't necessarily an answer, because if it's about reaching that part of your, well, maybe I can put it this way: does music therapy reach the pre-verbal part of you? Because if trauma is locked in that, and if trauma is locked in your body, because all the talk therapists in the world, I don't think get you particularly far. That's my personal view. But if there's some sort of process that can actually talk to your body and talk to your pre-verbal self, then, you know, and that's what my question is, can music therapy sort of go that deep and sort of communicate with those particular areas?
Yes, most definitely. That's why I'm so disappointed you didn't hear that last improvisation, because that's what happened with Jennie. It was primal, it was pre-verbal, and it came out. And yes, it definitely does do that. Music therapy does definitely do that when you're working at that depth. Not all music therapists work at that depth, but when you do, that's where it does. Most definitely.
What?
Thank you.
I've got a Jung Society.
On a Friday night at 9:30.
Anybody can leave the meeting if you want.
We have to be careful. The cleaners will be in here shortly and kick us out of the hall.
Well, that's one thing we don't have to worry about, is running around and washing up all the cups and everything and putting the chairs away and the library away.
Now, can I suggest, Kirstin, Kada, who I think is Karen, had a question that singing and drawing may help with our sense of anxiety in relation to the trauma that we're all feeling in relation to the virus epidemic at the moment. Karen may wish to speak to that.
Yes.
So, what is the best way that we can deal with this unreal world we're living in at the moment?
Good question, isn't it? Well, this is one way, by talking to each other on Zoom. Everybody's got a different perspective on life, and everybody's got a different way of dealing with life, but most particularly at this time, we need to get ourselves fairly reasonably organised so that we aren't waking up in the morning and wondering what day it is and what are we going to do for the day. We need to have daily tasks that we're written down and daily routines that we can bring ourselves to. And we need to give to ourselves in terms of self-care. So the things that you really enjoy doing, like gardening or going for a walk or singing, that's one of my things, singing or playing the piano, and writing in a journal, cooking. Cooking's another thing. All of those things.
Knitting.
You recognise it, all recognise it. Crocheting, knitting,
needlework,
like Lynn is doing, knitting. It's a wonderful thing, knitting, isn't it? You just sit there and your hands keep working and wow, look what you've just made.
Hey, beautiful.
Yay. I have a client who came to me 3 years ago and laid out on the floor of the therapy room the most amazing mandalas she had actually created by crochet piece of rug it was. And she sat there and she explained to me every part of that rug and why she put this colour here and why she did those sort of crochets there and all this kind of thing. Oh, it's just the most amazing thing I've ever seen that somebody could do that. So that, and I'm sure that Jennie would validate this, that when you get into a creative task like drawing a mandala or doing a painting or getting involved with music, playing a piece of music and really getting involved with it, reading a book, creating a beautiful garden, you get involved with the earth in the garden, you get involved with what you're creating in the pencils and the colours that you're creating on a piece of paper with you, or your crayons, or your paints, or you get involved with the sound and the different chords and the structure of the song and where it's taking you and how you can put words to it or not, as the case may be. And all of those things take you into the creative brain and into another world that is not quite so harsh as the anxiety-ridden world we're all currently living in at the moment. So I hope I've answered your question.
I think a walk every day is very important.
Exercise is excellent, yes. If we can walk, let's walk.
Yeah,
Well, Jane, do you want to conclude our meeting?
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you very much for everyone participating and coming along. It's a bit uncharted territory that we're exploring, but we're managing, and that's the main thing, and that we're being patient with it. I think we just have to go along, as our lovely Prime Minister said, be patient. And I think that's a really good key word that he's come up with our technology. Our daughter tried to do technology working at home on Monday, as well as homeschooling her 2 children. She said it was the most frustrating day ever because she had to get herself online with her work and then get the 2 children online. So it was quite frustrating, and she got very angry about it. But then I said, well, you just have to be patient, dear. And patience seems to be a key word. So I'd like to say thank you very much for everybody for coming along and participating. I think, and also to Kirstin, thank you for the most amazing and engaging evening of your, and also your interesting work over many years that you've done. It's just amazing. Thank you.
Jane. But I'd also like to thank everybody who took part in tonight's lecture for your patience and your kindness, because this certainly was an experiment, wasn't it? And we hope that it will improve as time goes by.
And I'm sorry we were late. We were waiting. We followed the wrong link.
Oh,
we were. The meeting said the host is busy with another meeting. Just hold on a minute.
Right. Well,
and I said to Robert, that's the wrong link, dear. You better get on to the other one.
That can be very confusing. Never mind, you're here now, and that was really good. But thank you everyone for your patience, and I hope that this lecture will have some effect on you, and the next time you listen to your favourite piece of music, just check in with your feelings and your emotions at the same time.
So thank you very much to John in the background there, and to Rob Tulip on their getting us going with all this, and of course to Kirstin in particular for the preparation and the content and presentation tonight.
Well done.
Thank
Otherwise,
you.
if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be having anybody. So
well, we want to provide our members with all of the things that they want to have, and this is the way to do it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Every Friday on the first Friday of the month, and we've got Robert Tulip coming up next month. Is that right, Robert? Isn't it?
Yes.
I'm looking forward to it.
Interesting. We're all looking forward
You should
to
come
that.
along.
We're all looking forward to that very much.
Yes, we are.
Let's stop now.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Be kind to
Right.
yourselves. Bye.
Thanks so
Bye.
much, Kirstin.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
And also, this lecture will be on the Jung Society website. So for people who've missed tonight, you can catch up on it.
Yes.
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 I will send you a written copy of it, okay? Who will I send it to? Jean and Robert?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can send it out.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right, I'll do that.